Good evening and welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio and powered by our favorite sponsor, Tireget.com. That's Tireget.com. You have to buy tires from somebody, you might as well buy them from us and help fund the movement, help support the movement. We believe in the freedom of movement, and that's exactly what the establishment wants to take from you now. I am your host, Royce White, here in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota, for episode 122. 122. Welcome back to all the subscribers, and I want to get into the Neocon today, and we're going to take some time out to explain exactly what the Neocon really is, because after Friday's episode, I think it was Friday. No, I don't even remember which of after 121, which might have been Sunday night. I forget. Saturday night. That's what I think it was. Saturday night. After episode 121, I talked about things, that transpired with Jason, and I'm wishing my good friend, my dear friend Jason well, and his journey to find the truth, and I hope this podcast can help explain some of that in some sense. But I got a lot of questions afterward, a lot of feedback, and people asking, what's the definition of a neocon? So I think in fairness, it's prudent for us to go back and talk about what neoconservatism is, and as a result, what the neocon really is. And it is at the heart of matters. And because when we talk about it, you'll understand why it's at the heart of the current events unfolding right now and there in the Middle East, but all around the world. And we'll be able to better understand things going forward as the conversation evolves from here. This is sort of a benchmark of the podcast where we have a lot of things in place. We have website in place. We have our patron platform in place. We have our lighting and our sound at working well. We believe if you have problems with the sound or the lighting, please let us know. But we've got enough of a sample size from the audience to know that those things are pretty well positioned. So a bit of experimentation through the first 100 or so episodes, but we feel like we found a sweet spot, and now we want to focus on evolving the conversation, starting with the neocon. Not starting with BLM, not starting with the LGBTQ, not starting with radical feminism or the Time's Up, Me Too movement. I talked about those a lot through the first half of the podcast or through the first 100 episodes. Now we're going to talk about the people inside the wire. And this episode is appropriate to do so because I had to speak on a few truths that I think the conservative movement is slow to acknowledge. They're slow to speak about with a full throat, and it's really holding us back. And it's holding us back in a number of ways, but mainly we're getting robbed. Okay, so we're going to talk about the neocon today, but before I do that, I want to read a letter that was written by the great Archbishop Vigano, um, who was formerly the apostolic nuncio there in the Vatican. Archbishop Vigano is somebody in the Catholic Church who has cautioned about the deep church, which in many ways mirrors the deep state of the United States of America and this sort of globalist mentality or mindset. And he's been called a conspiracy theorist, and he's been called somebody who just wants attention. And by speaking out against the corruption there in the Vatican and in Rome is somebody we shouldn't listen to. But I wanted to share his letter, if I can, to start the podcast. Come forth in the name of God. Message for the Reawaken America Tour, October 14th, 2023. This is about 2 weeks back. Dear friends, praise be Jesus Christ. Allow me to address you, first of all, to thank you for the witness you are giving to your fellow Americans. The awakening of consciences is the first step towards liberation from a subversive leadership that has usurped the highest places in both national and international institutions. Because opening one's eyes and looking at reality is essential if you are to understand what is really happening, denounce the globalist coup d'etat and regain the national sovereignty and fundamental freedoms that have been taken away from you. You have all witnessed in recent years a radical change in society, a change planned by people without any electoral mandate and imposed by sold-out rulers. The United States of America, like many other nations hostage to the Agenda 2030, is facing a very serious crisis: inflation, an out-of-control, self-induced migration crisis, human trafficking and child trafficking, rampant crime and the weakening of law enforcement, the liberalization of crime and impunity, social degradation everywhere, new drugs, the new drugs that ruin the people who take them, the aberrations of woke ideology, the LGBTQ plus agenda imposed in schools, discrimination against whites, and there is still more. The war against President Donald Trump, the electoral fraud in the presidential election, the great reset plans that seem to be proceeding smoothly, and the bottomless pit of funding and military aid that seeks to prolong the conflict in Ukraine, thereby covering up the crimes of the Biden family and the Democrats. And finally, a very disturbing new scenario of war in the Middle East. This multi pronged siege has all the hallmarks of an unconventional war that is far more devastating than an armed conflict. And I'm going to stop there. That's only about half of the letter, but I wanted to start with that piece just for two reasons. Number one, I think people get the Catholic faith tradition and the Catholic community very mistaken that there's this sort of hegemonic, submission to the Pope. It's often a Catholic trope that we all follow the Pope and nobody deviates from the Pope's worldview or mandates. And there are people within the Catholic Church, especially as of late, and rightfully so, per Catholic tradition and doctrine, that are very upset and in disagreement with the way that the current Pope has went about his position as the vicar of Christ in the Catholic community. And I just wanted to share how Archbishop Vigano speaks. And now you should, in my opinion, it's somewhat inappropriate to speak the way that you write. I think writing is a different medium than speaking. But it just goes to show you that when the Archbishop of the Catholic Church, or former, an Archbishop of the Catholic Church, such as Carl Vigano, who wants to speak about globalism and the threats that face us here in America, specifically, this letter was to Americans. That he doesn't hold any punches and he doesn't talk down to his audience. He speaks directly about the issues in accurate and precise terms that help illustrate and articulate the full scope of what we're facing. And he goes on in the letter to explain things, in great depth. And I really appreciate Archbishop Vigano. I had the privilege to speak before him in a virtual conference, of which I had no idea I was going to be speaking before him, and it's a great life's honor to have been able to do that, even unknowingly. So I still have to try and find that conference and share that with my kids. I mean, to speak before somebody as profound, insightful, and courageous as Archbishop Vigano is a true honor. So let's deal with this neocon thing. I got a bunch of people who ask me, what do you mean by neoconservative? What is a neoconservative to you? How do you define it? And in order to define the neocon, I have to go back after World War II, which I often do, but I'm going to do again today for anybody who may be new to the podcast or anybody who hasn't heard it before. If I go back to World War II, you know, Germany surrenders, Japan gets hit with the atomic bomb. America and the Allied forces have seemingly won World War II, and there's going to be a restructuring of the entire global community. Now, the restructuring took place in a form of international peacekeeping uh, organization known as the United Nations. Before, in World War One, it was the League of Nations, then it became the United Nations, and now, along with the United Nations, came a set of international monetary agencies that would help restructure the monetary system to try and facilitate peace. From that, there was a conference called the Bretton Woods Conference. Bretton Woods was essentially when America came to the table and created a gold standard base monetary system, of which America would be the hegemony of this global monetary system, and thus become really the dominant power in the world. And I start there for no other reason than to help people understand it was Bretton Woods Conference and the inception of the International Monetary Fund and the World Bank and what would become agencies like the World Economic Forum or the Federal Reserve System. It was Bretton Woods Conference that set the stage for America's dollar to become our number one export. And if you don't know that, we'll be revisiting it later. But it's important to note here and now that as far as America's economy goes, the United States dollar is our number one export, which makes us unique, right? As the reserve currency of the world, the United States dollar is our number one export. So Bretton Woods Conference and that entire restructuring of the monetary policy set the stage for where we are today. Now, over 20 years, and this was a 20-year project. This was 20 years of ebbs and flows of policy. Some would say that the players who wanted to bring this about were already in place and working on this agenda, but things really got kicked off when Nixon and Kissinger laid out their plot, I would call it, to take us off the gold standard. And when we got taken off the gold standard was sort of the inception of the neoconservative movement that would then be doubled down and tripled down on with the Bushes. Okay. And Reagan was in there. Reagan was a part of that transition. He was the happy face. He was the happy face. He was the likable guy who had all the neocons sort of to the back of him that either used him or used his likeness and his likability to forward their agenda. And now, obviously, when we talk about Reagan, as I pointed out, the Iran Contra scandal was an incredible scandal, the biggest scandal of Reagan's presidency, where we got into a three-way trade off the books, a three-way deal brokered by the CIA between the Iranians, the Sandinistas, and black communities, or communities all across America, really, with drugs and money and guns. And sort of a drugs and guns for money, a black bag, black money, dark money sort of scam or mission was run. And you had all the usual suspects, people that you would know from history, infamous names such as Oliver North, who was a lieutenant at the time, but Oliver North was working with the CIA in some respects to facilitate and broker these deals. So the CIA was involved, and also there were people who were a part of Reagan's administration. Now, a person's administration is large, right? I mean, we know that when you say it's a part of his administration, you can't really throw everything at his feet, and that's the correction I want to make in some respects to my last podcast and talking about Mark Levin. I want to be a little bit more. I want to be a little bit more detailed, I might say, right? And I want to be a little bit more nuanced. And that's why you might need a 2.5-hour podcast to talk about these things, because just the nuance alone will help you understand, hopefully help you understand how to look at the world as it is versus how it may appear or how some want you to see it. So Edwin Meese, and I got his name wrong. I called him Edward Meese, but I was in the heat of battle there between me and Mark Levin and my good friend who is now being co-opted by the neocons, Jason Whitlock, who I love and respect. And if you unsubscribe from Fearless, you're no friend of mine. And if you are still watching Fearless, give Jason a shout and tell him that we love him and we're praying for him, and we are going to save him from the neocons. I promise that. In the heat of conversation and an emotional evening, I mispronounced Attorney General Meese's first name. His name is Edwin Meese. My apologies. And as I said, he was the Attorney General, and what many claimed his participation in the Iran Contra scandal was essentially he tried to mitigate the exposure for President Reagan. Right? He was a loyal attorney general in that respect. He tried to basically separate Reagan and Reagan's presidency and legacy and his image from Oliver North and the sort of security and deep state that had run this mission underneath Reagan's watch. And respectfully, I'm not saying that Reagan knew what happened during the Iran Contra scandal. Now, there are many people who would say that Reagan for sure knew what was going on. And there was a lot of controversy that at the time, Oliver North had obstructed justice by destroying documents at the order of William Casey, who was the director of the CIA. Or he was recommended to destroy documents. And if he's destroying documents and the attorney general's involved and you got Oliver North who, fell on his sword, so to speak, and said, hey, this was all my deal in exchange for immunity of a sort. I mean, charges were brought, but eventually he was given a pass, all but given a pass. And he actually ran for Senate there in Virginia when the whole thing became declassified. And if I might add, Oliver North, Edwin Meese, the Attorney General, with his chief of staff and attorney, Mark Levin, good old Mark Levin from the Blaze. Mark Levin were some of the staunch advocates to keep the Iran Contra scandal classified, not to release the documents publicly, per the historical record. Now, do I understand that when it comes to security state and security clearance and classifying, declassifying documents, the military and the level of secrecy that has become normal for American citizens and American politics is so deep that who knows what really went down? Yeah, I get that. I get that. But on paper, there are some things historically we can point to and say, wait a minute, it begs to call some of these people, especially those still in prominent positions in the spotlight, to speak on these issues, especially given that we are now entering into a time with some of the similar problems with the security state, with the intelligence community, and with the administrative state. So I don't want to make any false accusations that Reagan for sure knew about what went down with the Iran Contra scandal. In fact, I would even venture to guess, because I often think, if I were the president of the United States, how would I even go about daily operations? And if you take the time right now to think about that yourself, just in today's context, currently for President Biden or President Trump, there are 19 intelligence agencies alone, just in the intelligence community. And every day, the President of the United States gets a daily brief from the Director of National Intelligence on an aggregate of all 19 intelligence agencies. You got the CIA, the NHA, the NSA, the DHS, the DIA, the DOD. I mean, they're just the FBI. It goes on and on and on. And so, really, you have to figure the only way to even handle such a vast amount of information is to compartmentalize and hire or appoint great people who you trust to your administration to head these agencies and to look over this material for you and have the wisdom themselves to know which things they need to bring you, which things need your attention, and which things don't. I mean, and that's just the intelligence community. Don't forget the Department of Housing, and you got energy and transportation and so on and so forth. I mean, and not we haven't even gotten to trade and our foreign relations. This thing, government at this size is a shit show, and I'm not making an excuse for Reagan or politicians writ large. I'm just saying I understand the scope of it, but that is why leadership is so important and integrity is so important, and a culture is set that is not based on a sort of good old boys club or who I graduated from college with, or it has to really be based on merit, and the American people often become the first line of defense from the administrative state and our elected offices being hijacked by not by the candidates who get elected, but by the power brokers that sit around. This is why Steve Bannon was so adamant about deconstructing the administrative state, because there are many administrators in there who have been in there for a long time and have many secrets to protect and have a lot of corruption that they benefit from. So Iran Contra happens, and then, after Reagan, you get Daddy Bush. Oh, and Daddy Bush triples down on the intelligence, on the security state, and effectively the military-industrial complex. We went into a war in Iraq, Afghanistan, but don't forget we had Desert Storm. The conflict in the Middle East really got tense during the Bush's reign. And the Bushes, although Reagan is the saint of the Republican Party, of the conservative movement, the Bushes really are the face of what we would call neoconservatism. right? And when you go look into neoconservatism, I'm not going to go all into the history and tell you every name, but I can tell you a few names like Elliot Abrams and you got the Kagan brothers, right? And just so happens, and we'll get to this in a moment when we talk about how the neoconservatism is linked to globalism, like Archbishop Vigano was talking about. And I think the conservative movement and the Mark Levins get a serious pass from being considered in our conversations about globalism. We sort of leave out the neocon in that equation, not at the grassroots level. A lot of grassroots MAGA America First citizens understand this dynamic, but for some reason, your conservatives that spend a lot of time talking about BLM or woman's right to choose or the LGBTQ, for some reason often just completely miss the boat when it comes to military and military industrial complex. Not by accident, and I'm going to explain how in a moment. So, you can look up the Kagans and, you know, Kagan married to Victoria Newland, who is a liberal, right? I mean, she's not hiding it. She's as woke as they come. Victoria Newland, WEF, ambassador to Ukraine, and she's the queen bee of the whole Ukraine, Russia, foreign, vertical. She's the one. She's the lead woman, and her husband Kagan just so happens to be high up the trough in the Council of Foreign Relations, right? The CFR. And if any of you know about the CFR, it you talk about globalism, it doesn't get any more globalist than the Council on Foreign Relations. And if you don't know about it, please go read into it. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it. But the neoconservatism that we now accept in the conservative movement, people who often hide out as being MAGA or America First, like Mark Levin, are running a real con. And let me tell you what the con is. It goes back to us going off of the gold standard and having a fiat currency. And when this whole Israel deal popped up, me and my best friend AJ Barker, who I plan to have on the show in the weeks to come, as soon as his schedule permits, he's a teacher, so he works during the weeks, and I film during the day, and then it airs at night. But hopefully on the weekend we'll find a time to get him in here, and you can hear two young conservatives' perspective on what we're looking at. But he mentioned the vassal state, the idea of vassalism. And it dawned on me that we have a reverse vassal empire, right? A vassal empire, a vassal state is, we're America, we protect you, you pay tribute to us for us to protect you, right? Somewhere in here, it switched. And I think a key moment was when we went off of the gold standard and the currency became explicitly a fiat currency. Because now, wherever the United States dollar was, anywhere in the world, we had a justification to come and protect our national interests. Back to the very beginning, the number one export of America is our dollar itself. So if our dollar is in your country, if you're a part of the deal, if you're a part of the reserve currency system, we have a justification to come protect our national interests. And now that our military is there, when our military is there, now our military being there becomes the national interest itself. And that has effectively brought us into a very hostile tinderbox all around the world on many fronts, but especially there in Asia on the Eurasian landmass. Because, we have to ask the question constantly, where does offense end and defense begin, or vice versa? This is not an easy concept. This is not an easy question. And I don't pity anybody who has to make that decision or call in a position of power. I'm not saying it's easy. But what I am saying is it takes a very wise, insightful, human sort of spiritual, sacred honor perspective to get those types of questions and thus answers even remotely right. And we have not had people who really ask the question in earnest, let alone be able to give righteous answers. And that's why we find ourselves spread very thin, like the Roman Empire, protecting reverse vassal states all around the world, Israel being one of them, despite my support for Israel. I support Israel, but I also support Palestine being able to not get genocided. I mean, come on, what are we talking about? But anyway, Israel's a great example. And that's why this Mark Levin situation, with him being a neocon and the conversation about Israel popping up and my calling out Mark Levin has caused some trouble in the campfire, or at least it's created tension in the camp. And I'm unwilling to overlook these people. Just to be frank, there will be no neocon co-opt of the America First nationalist populist movement this year. Maybe next year, maybe after you guys kill me or find some trumped up charges to haul me off to a gulag. But as long as I'm here, free to be able to speak the truth, there will not be a neocon co-opt of this movement in this election cycle. We're going to put a stop to that shit right here, right now. Reverse vassalism. Israel's a vassal state. They're a state that we protect, and we pay them. And it started to dawn on me as this Israel thing unfolded, and I thought about the relationship between us and Israel. How does anybody justify us paying them to protect them? And then it clicked. What we're really doing is we're paying countries to be shell corporations for our military industrial complex. We're paying you to be an outpost of our nation, so our military has a justification to come do its business there, and its business is arms dealing. You know, America's other unique export is arms. Now, it's not one of the biggest exports of the American economy, but as far comparable to the rest of the world, we are the number one arms dealer exporter in the entire world. Well, just as a matter of fact, if you create this relationship with an Israel, for example, or any other nation, and you pay them to protect them, and they are now effectively a sort of shell corporation for your military, your national interest, and you have to constantly send them weapons or aid, like the great Russell Brand said, it creates the sort of circumstance for you to continuously need to clear your inventory, right? Just not only to clear your inventory, but to create conflict to clear your inventory, right? Let's start a war so that we can go to war, and that all of these sort of stockpiles of weapons and vehicles and all this other equipment, ammunition, whatever it is, we now have to get rid of that. And what happens is now there is a void that can be filled by those who manufacture military for the military industrial complex. And we saw that in Ukraine. When the Ukraine went into a fight, what did we give them? We gave them old stuff, right? The F-16 is old. We didn't give them, B-2 bombers. We didn't give them B-21 Raiders. We gave them, might have been F-15s or F-14s or whatever it was. They're older planes, older technology. And some of the anti-tank missiles and things like that were probably older as well. Follow me here. What's the point of it? The con is, and respectfully to all you conservatives out there, I'm going to say something that will probably feel like an attack, but I promise you it's not. It's me trying to call you into the truth and show you the way, the same way I did my dear friend Jason Whitlock, who both of us are black men, so it has nothing to do with race. But in this case, the Mark Levins of the world, the Fox Newses of the world, the Sean Hannitys, the George W. Bushes, the Bush seniors, the entire neocon crew, Kagan and all of them, all of them. The con is that they're going to always provide fear somewhere, sell a narrative of fear to justify stealing your fucking money, stealing the taxpayers' money. And it is that simple. That is the neocon, right? We're going to find a justification wherever we need to steal your shit and for you to like it, for you to accept it, for you to cheer it on. And a lot of you do cheer it on. And it's not just showing in Israel. It shows up there when it comes to the Russians, and it shows when we're in the Middle East in general, and it shows all over the place. It shows that not only can they trick you not only can they steal your shit, can they con you out of your tax money, they can get you to cheer for it. And what are the three things they use to get you to cheer for having your tax money taken from you, stolen from you, misappropriated? Geography. Somebody somewhere else far away is doing something you can't see. We got to surveil them. We got to keep our eyes on them. If we don't keep our eyes on them, no telling what they might do. Could end up in your neighborhood. Okay. Second thing, religion. Oh, that's a good go-to. Oh, these people over here, they have a different belief than you ideologically, although it may be true. And the first one, I digress. These people over here believe something different than you. We got to keep an eye on them. We got to suppress them. We got to keep the gate around them, or this thing may spill out and come to a theater near you. And the last one, which is dark and much less socially accepted today, is race. I mean, these people are Arabs. These people are Russians. These people are whatever they need to be. They're different than you, right? They don't think the same way you do. That one's a little less socially accepted, but you feel the premise, right? And when you go back in the history, it's funny, the woke left and the woke right, oh boy, they sure know how to work together and push everybody into the middle and get them arguing so that they can work both sides of the scam, right? They're on all sides of the trade. Not only this Ponzi scheme, but the trade of the narrative, right? The social narrative, the construction of the social narrative, and the selling of it. They're on all sides of the trade. Because in one sense, the left will tell you that white colonialism is the great evil of history, and they always fail to mention that the Arabs were the flip side of that drugs, piracy, slavery, globalist business model. The Arabs have always been in on the globalist business model. I don't know in what strange world the woke left gets off on creating this fugazi of a historical record where the Arabs are saintly or the oppressed, right? No, the Arabs had the intercontinental Eurasian slave trade, and the British Empire had the transatlantic slave trade. Right? They were both slavers from Great Britain all the way down to Saudi Arabia. All right, from England to Saudi Arabia, they were running a trade deal. Right? They were running slaves. They're slavers. Okay? They're slave taking nations, and quite frankly, their enemy slash ally slash neutral giant there in the East, China, is an ancient slave-taking nation. And quite frankly, Japan was a slave-taking nation. I mean, they tried to enslave the entire Chinese population on record as a means to build the Japanese empire. They're our ally now, and don't get me wrong, the samurai they're a formidable bunch. But dropping two atomic bombs on a country can change the cultural perspective. I mean, we all understand that. They make jokes that Japan went from samurais and kamikaze bombers to Hello Kitty in 50, 60 years, 70 years, whatever the case may be. And that's true, and it's not really funny because the atomic bomb is an inciting incident in history as well for military-industrial complex. I digress. So these are the three things that they will always go to. They will always find a way to go to these three things to create fear to justify the neocon: geography, religion, race. Somebody somewhere who believes and has faith and prays to someone different than you, who looks different than you, and is just innately different than you. We have to watch them, and we have to always be ready to strike, or else they're going to make it to a theater near you. Con. What's the con? The con is a $2 trillion a year budget, a $2 trillion a year budget that has to make do no matter what. I mean, the business of it is so consistent. You can see where the impulse is to continue the scam. And therein lies the danger. And therein lies a portion of the administrative state that is not only dishonest, but in some sense desensitized and desensitized to the prospect of war, and then becomes bloodthirsty. $2 trillion a year, the budget for defense. $2 trillion a year, gotta make do. Got to make do. It's probably really $3 trillion a year. There's a lot of claims out there that from the black budgets and all the things that get siphoned off from everything else that still funnel its way back into military or intelligence or black ops or whatever, probably looking at around $3 trillion a year. Okay. You take $3 trillion a year, what's the VIG on it? How much can they steal from it? Probably about $1 trillion, at least. Okay, so the VIG on it is $1 trillion. All right, you whack $1 trillion up between 2,000 people, and you see where we have a big fucking problem. I hope, right? When 2,000 people whack up $1 trillion every single year, we see where the American taxpayer not having $500 to put together in a crisis is a real crime of taxation, a real crime of representation, a real misuse of military and defense and security to make American citizens beg for economic tyranny. $3 trillion a year, $1 trillion a year goes to about 2,000 people. 2,000 contractors or CEOs or administrative, gurus or politicians or PACs or the lawyers doing the deal, brokering the deal, or whatever the case may be. Big, big cash cow. And when you see it through that lens, you start to understand how people on both sides of the aisle who are ideologically opposed in every other sense find their way back to the middle of the row when it comes time to go to war. And so when I go on Jason or Fearless, or when I go on War Room with Steve Bannon, or when I go on InfoWars and I emphasize the military-industrial complex, this is why. Because despite all of our cultural wedge issues, for some strange reason, our politicians who never really come together under any other premise, any other auspices other than military. Military. And they'll fence it as national defense. They'll fence it as homeland security. They'll fence it as national security. But really, I mean, you've been telling us the Iranians are developing a nuclear weapon for 30 years, 25 years, and it's getting harder and harder to believe the whole narrative as things unfold. I mean, if nobody in the intelligence community is watching Israel's wall, it's very hard for me to believe that you have the proper surveillance on Iran to know whether or not they're developing nuclear weapons. That's just me. I mean, I'm just going to first principles logic again here. If you can't see Hamas rolling up on Israel with 5,000 rockets, either we're spread too thin and we don't have the surveillance to watch all of the national interests we say we need to, which is what happens when you follow in the footsteps of the Roman Empire, or we do have the surveillance that we need to, and we're lying about the Iranians developing nuclear weapons because we're watching them the same way we're watching Hamas, which makes this latest attack in Israel now in question. You see how the two sides of the narrative don't really reconcile with one another? Well, they can run that story on you because they'll just fill your timeline with the LGBTQ and abortion, and I'm not saying those aren't important issues. But what I'm saying is the people like Mark Levin spend all their time ratcheting up the fear and emotion of middle white America, of boomer white America, with their 401ks and their their pensions and their Medicaid and their Medicare. They spend all their time ratcheting up the emotion and the fear about these cultural wedge issues, and we continuously miss, overlook, or just flat out don't want to see the military industrial complex sticking its fucking hand in your pocket and taking every last penny it can take, taking everything that's not tied down. And what's the deepest and ugliest, most dishonest part of the neocon? The most ugliest part of the neocon is it's not really conservative. It's liberal. I mean, it is liberal. And when you listen to a David Frum, which is why I replayed the debate between David Frum and Steve Bannon, David Frum, who's another neocon, worked for President Bush, was in the administration. He comes right out and says in the debate, hey, conservatism is to conserve what is liberal. I mean, flat out says this is liberalism. I mean, we just have our specific brand, right? And that's exactly what it is. And I'll tell you, when it comes to the money, when it comes to the two sides of the political dichotomy finding their way back to the middle of the row with the cannon pointed right at your wallet, right at your net worth, right at your quality of life, your standard of living, the value of your citizenship. When they get there, oh, their friends on the left do the same thing. There are two main budget items that happen, that take place, that are funded every year, that always make do: military, which the neocons run, and Medicaid, Medicare, which the socialist Democrats run. Uniparty. Always got to make do. And it's so convenient to be able to say, I mean, this is what a con man's going to do. Like, everybody would look at that and go, well, yeah, we should have health care. We have to take care of our citizens, and yeah, we should. And we have to have defense so that we can protect our borders, and yeah, we absolutely should. The question is, the question should be in your mind. What does it say that the two parties who control these two factions intentionally use legislation to inflate the cost and then make you pay the inflated price? Where I'm from, that would be called guerrilla pimping. Where I'm from, that would be called uh, guerrilla dealing, right? I mean, you get a distro in a neighborhood, right? A distro or a plug or a connect, somebody who has access to a big amount of product, and they're gonna distribute it wholesale to a number of dealers in a given neighborhood, town. Maybe they're doing it across the country, like Freeway Ricky Ross did from L.A., who was working with the Iran Contra CIA deal, and his drugs made it all the way across the country. $400 million cocaine empire. Who knows how much money he just blew off, but almost $1 billion probably, inflate adjustable. $1 billion cocaine enterprise, just wholesaling from state to state, right? So you get a dealer, and let's say you at home want to go buy from dealer B. Dealer A's, you've been working with him for 3 months, and then 6 months or whatever it is, and dealer B comes along and he has a better deal, or maybe you want to switch product, or whatever the case may be. Right? Sorry to use a drug deal analogy, but I'm trying to connect the dots here for my boomers and for my young black men who may think in this sort of dialectic. Hopefully we can find some real common ground to save this fucking republic. Dealer B comes along, and dealer A says, you know what? If you buy from dealer B, I'm going to kill you. That's just it. This is the price. I'm increasing the price. I'm increasing the price for no other reason other than my own vices, agendas, ambitions, my own greed. I'm increasing the price, and you got to buy. That, my friends, is exactly what the neocons and the neoliberals have done with the defense budget and the Medicaid and Medicare budget. With defense and health care, $4 to $5 trillion a year, $4 to $5 trillion every single year, and it has to make do. And not only does it have to make do by legislative and political mandate, it has to make do because you beg for it. They're making you beg for it, and then they're making you buy it at an inflated cost. My friends, this is robbery. This is illegitimate by so many standards, it's almost hard to talk about. I've tried to do my best not using profanity on this podcast because I figure it's educational. Maybe you want to sit down with your children and let them listen. So I've tried to keep the profanity to a minimum, but I'm having a really tough time. I got to tell you, this level of dishonesty, this level of crookedness, this scope of crookedness is the greatest Ponzi scheme ran in human history. In human history. I digress. The neocon, Mark Levin, right at the head of the snake, right at the top seat of the table. He's the conservative voice for America. And he wants to fund Israel and Ukraine in perpetuity, as much as they need, unlimited. He can say he wants to put, conditions on it. Really, he hasn't said he wanted to put any conditions on it. He's like, let's fight it out until we win. No telling what that means. In Russia, we know what it means. In Russia, the Atlanticists, they want to take back Crimea. I mean, give me a break. Why do we care about some shithole territory between the Ukrainians and the Russians? Ukraine, little tiny place. Russia, big place, big military, big nuclear arsenal. Ooh, let's go to war with Russia in perpetuity. Russia war probably never makes landfall here in the States. Great justification to take your tax money. Got to beware of the Russians. Taiwan, oh, that'd be even better. I mean, let's just shoot our way to the top, boys. Let's just shoot our way right to the top of the heap, the money pile, right? And let's just hope, as a consequence, that a nuclear war doesn't break out. And if a nuclear war breaks out, we got other people. We got other people who that would benefit. And now this is where the neoconservative neocon, the neoliberal, neoconservative, neocon, the new con from these two jamokes, these two bad hombres. This is where it becomes a globalist con, right? It doesn't get it doesn't get much more globalist than a staunch, sort of dogmatic, interventionist foreign policy, right? We have to intervene all over the world to protect our national interests here at home. I mean, that's kind of the sine qua non of globalism, to be quite honest. It's not this intellectual, posh esoteric, philosophy. It's like tangible, measurable, metric. We're coming. Our dollar's there. Our military's there. Not only are we making arms, you're going to buy them. You're going to buy them from us at market value, probably marking it up. I don't know. Who knows, really? Because anytime you get to audit in the Department of Defense, billions of dollars just go missing. We don't know. Nobody even has their arms around it because we're all so afraid of the Muslims. Give me a break. Not afraid of no Muslims. Secondarily, this is where the neocon movement becomes a full-blown globalist movement. Because the reverse vassal state only leads to two inevitable outcomes. One, we go to war. We win a war. We go to war. There's a stalemate. Both sides sort of rescind to their respectable corners. Cooler heads prevail until the war pops off again. The war machine is good. It's healthy. We can justify defense in between wars, in case we're ever attacked again. Right, 9/11. The other scenario is that we push war all the way to the grand finale. And here is where it's very hard to know who's gaming who, whether the military industrial complex, the neocons of America are gaming the globalists, or whether the globalists are gaming the neocons. I mean, it's not so easy to tell. And if I'm being honest, I would say that probably what's taking place is there is uh, uh, a group of intellectual, scientific, managerial elites there, like in Davos, who have their tentacles in both sides and all sides of the trade, and they're trying to manage it and make sure they're in position to absorb the momentum of whatever outcome takes place. And this brings me to the latest development in our sort of ongoing fallout there on the Eurasian landmass. The new axis of evil, the new axis of evil, as laid out by uh, newly elected Speaker of the House, um, Johnson, Speaker Johnson. The new axis of evil is Iran, Russia, and China. Right. The Iron Triangle, as I so, uh, you know, I I said it a few days ahead of time, but I was really trying to urge this on Jason Whitlock's show on Fearless. I tried to talk about the Iron Triangle and the alliance on paper between Iran, China, and Russia, because I knew that this is going to become a topic of significance. And look, let me help out here if I can. It's not that Iran, China, and Russia isn't a newly formed alliance. It's not that the Iron Triangle isn't a threat or a danger. That's not the issue here. The issue here is who are they working for? See, we all want to we in the West want to believe that they're working on their own merit, that they're working on their own for their own interests, and part of it is maybe that. But it's just as likely that they're working in the interest of someone else. There's someone else pulling their strings. There's someone else influencing them. And it was Kissinger and Nixon, and it was the whole going into China and this idea that when we went into China, we would make them more Chinese. Same thing we did with the Russians. We opened up this trade agreement with the Russians after the fall of the Soviet Union, and Russia was going to become more Western. The Iranians, they didn't had a problem with the West since the days of the Greeks, right? The Persians have felt that the Persian Empire should have dominated the world, not Western democracy or this idea of freedom and whatnot. That they all should have came under, and that we all should have come under the empirical rule of what they deem as the greatest empire in history, the Persian Empire. Right? So the Persians ain't never had no love for the West, but fallen empire, you know, remnant of an empire, take the money, they get it how they can, right? they're gonna do what they need to continue to play the game. And they've caused a shit stir there in the Middle East. I mean, the proxy war between them and the Saudis is one that you can barely make heads or tails of, truly. Now, on the faith and Islamic side, again, religion is one of the three springboards that steal your tax money. Faith. The Iranians, at least publicly, say that they should be the rightful stewards of Islam. They should have Mecca and Medina. They want Mecca and Medina. They feel the Saudis have been too amenable to westernization in the heartland of the faith of Islam. Are the Saudis sellouts to the faith? Hey, by their own standards and their own admission, I guess you could say so. Not much different than us here in the West with Christianity, but I digress. Everybody's abandoning the faith at some level. But that's the Iranians' claim. I don't buy it. I have another theory. My theory of the case is that when we went to go teach the Chinese how to become the manufacturing superpower of the world, that European uh, uh, the Europeanization of China, the Western influence of China, let them in on a few secrets. Not unlike the secrets that China steals today with proprietary and intellectual property and proprietary technology, intellectual property, and so on and so forth. The Chinese will steal your shit, effectively, is what I'm trying to say. Well, when we went to go do this deal to make them the next global manufacturing superpower, we let them in on a few secrets. And one of them, like I've spoken about in the show many times before, is Mackinder's land theory, the Mackinder World Island theory. And again, to take you back through this history for anybody who hasn't seen it or heard it on the show before or doesn't know about it, I'm going to do so. If you've heard about it or if you know about it, please just bear with me. For the people who may not, I intend to be educational, so we have to work with everybody where they're at. I don't want to talk over people's heads. Halford John Mackinder was a British intellectual in the early 1900s, right before the inception of the Federal Reserve System here in America, but and World War One. I mean, that was another um, benchmark or key point in that timeline. Halford John Mackinder makes this claim about the Eurasian landmass and the world island theory, and then we had the Federal Reserve make landfall here in America, and then we went into a World War One. So Mackinder's theory was, again, to restate, that Great Britain as a naval power, if they continued to rely solely on naval supremacy, was going to be behind the curve, behind the eight ball, in a world that seemed it was going to evolve drastically in ground transportation and air transportation. That as ground transportation and air transportation advanced, all of the supremely naval based powers would become obsolete and would eventually fall under the rule of these more sophisticated armies, countries, nations, empires. And so his caution to Great Britain was that area known as the Heartland, which is in effect the Ukraine, that that little that little area there. That he who controls the heartland control he who controls the heartland. No, he who controls Eastern Europe controls the heartland. He who controls the heartland controls the Eurasian world island. That the heartland was the key to dominance, military and economic dominance on the Eurasian landmass. The Eurasian landmass is actually the Afro-Eurasian landmass, but hey, Halford John Mackinder, being an acolyte or a descendant of the school of thought from Darwin, why would he count the Africans in it? They're not even a real part of it, right? They're just there, right? I'm not trying to make it a racial thing, but come on, Darwin, social Darwinism. This was what led to race ideology. That is another red herring to distract us from a bunch of money schemes and scams and corrupt political agendas. So the Afro-Eurasian landmass is what got abbreviated to being the Eurasian landmass. And Mackinder's theory was, if you control the Eurasian landmass, you control 50% of the world's resources, which is true. And all of these Western elites, all of these Western academics, all of these intellectuals, politicians, corporate leaders, right? CEOs, titans of industry, all of them after World War II were forced to adopt Great Britain's foreign policy. Their foreign policy has always led back to Mackinder's land theory. And that was the deal that was done between Churchill and Roosevelt. The Atlantic Charter, another thing you should go and become familiar with. The Atlantic Charter was Winston Churchill going to Roosevelt saying they needed help to defend the Nazis. And Roosevelt told him, hey, we'll help you, but you have to surrender your colonial empire. And what he was really telling him is, we'll take it from here, champ. We got it. Yeah, we'll help you, but we have our own ideas essentially about the way the world should be. And if we're gonna help you, and we're the new big dog on campus, this is still spill out. This is only 100 years after the American Revolution. I mean, there's still a sentiment there in Britain that America is a defector, right? That the Americans are cowboys. They're defectors from the plan, right? And there's a feeling in America that, hey, the British and the French, they think of us as their little brother, but look at how prosperous we've become. I mean, look at how well we're doing. Now you have to come back to us and need us to stop Hitler from taking all your shit. So, hey, what goes around comes around, right? That's kind of underlying sentiment between the Americans and the Europeans, at the height of World War II. So when World War II ends, British Empire, on paper, relinquishes their colonial rule, although many nations still hold their allegiance to the Commonwealth. So, and not only that, but many nations still pay the Commonwealth as though they were a vassal state in a vassal empire. They don't pay it to us. And so you see how this kind of deal got way off track. And we adopted the foreign policy of the Europeans, which brings me to my conclusion. I hope I've created a succinct picture, which we're going to continue to talk about this week. It's not over. I want to dive more into globalism, the Atlantic Charter, and how the European intellectuals sent their academics into our institutions and made us adopt this idea of being Atlanticist. I mean, we're all Atlanticists. We're all European, which was based on common use of language, English, but it was also based slightly on race. I mean, right? It's like, it's us versus the Mongols and the Arabs and the Russians, right? Or the Arabs, whoever they could put in another group to co-opt America into protecting them. And so what Donald Trump did that I still think is the most honorable and definitive hallmark of his presidency was not bringing us into any new wars. And they can tell you they don't like him because of the way he tweets. They can tell you they don't like him because of his past personal relationships with women. They can tell you they don't like him because he's racist or xenophobic or whatever. Listen, the Uniparty, the Neocon, neoliberal world order does not like Donald Trump for one sole reason, because he refuses to fund the $5 to $6 trillion that is there every year on the budget that must make due to give these 2 to 3 to 4,000 administrative political elites their slice of the pie, specifically as it pertains to military, but also when it comes to healthcare. They're mad because he's fucking with the money. He's fucking with the money. And not only is he fucking with the money here domestically, he's messing with the money internationally. He's saying this whole deal between us and Europe is backwards. Why do we pay you to protect you? And the conventional wisdom of the neocon is, hey, it's fine. It's fine if our dollar's there. It means we have a way to put our military there, and if our military there is there, then the $2 to $3 trillion from the military budget is all we really need to grease the wheel, to grease the war machine. We're fine. America's business is war. China's business is business. Per the Business Insider, just a couple weeks ago, they said, hey, China, the CCP, they're in Beijing. They've made a shift. Their business is no longer business. They're going to focus on national security and advanced weaponry and technology. As America starts to do what? We start to crank up the war machine and spread ourselves really thin ahead of a potential conflict there in the South China Sea with our biggest and most dangerous adversary. Now, the question is this all happening by accident? Now, I laid out this entire thing between the neocon, the neoliberal, uniparty, their real disdain for Donald Trump and MAGA, who by definition are America first. You can't be sending money and military resources and all this other foreign aid to countries and vassal states all around the world in perpetuity, especially if the economy, if the national budget is in a deficit where now we can become subject to the will and influence of foreign international agencies or just the debt alone, right? Being in debt is a vulnerable position. You're vulnerable to your debtors, right? They hate Donald Trump because he is not willing to keep the deal the same. He's a money guy. He's offended by the deal. He's saying his point is, hey, we'll protect you. Don't get me wrong, but you got to pay up, right? You Europeans got to pay up. What's the Europeans' play? How does globalism really start to take root in this multipolar world? Well, they're hedging their bets on both sides. They're hedging their bets on both sides as they've always done. And this is the modus operandi of the crown. And you could argue that this is part of the modus operandi that a nation like Israel, who learned from the crown, who was the foster child of the crown, learned this sort of tactic. They're playing on both sides of the bet. We're on all sides of the trade as America, But we're not really there as America. We're there serving the interest of the Europeans. And that's exactly what we're doing. This is not our war. This is not our war. This is Great Britain's deal down there in the Middle East. This is Great Britain's deal over there in the Ukraine. The Great Game, another historical topic you should read up on. And we'll talk more about the Great Game as the Russia-Ukraine conflict potentially, expands. But the Great Game is an ancient conflict between the Russian Empire and the British Empire. Ancient conflict. Ancient conflict. This is their deal. On every front, it's their deal. And so the way they're hedging their bets, hey, we'll fund the neocons. We'll let the neocons be the world's police. We'll let the neocons bat down our enemies. We'll let the neocons present the threat of violence and force. And if they have the will and if they have the stomach for it, if they have the balls to do it, we're happy to let them keep our enemies suppressed. We're happy to let them keep their boot on the neck of our enemies. We're happy to do that. But in the event that they fail, we need a backup plan. And what's the obvious backup plan for the Europeans and the party of Davos? Yeah, let the Americans suppress the Iranians or the Russians or the Chinese. Let them stand watch. Let them be the gunmen. Let them be the security. But if they fail, what's our backup plan? China. And not just China, potentially the access of China, Russia, and Iran. Who has more relationship? Who has more positive views about a China-centric future than Europe? Nobody. Nobody's more pro-China in their economic trade, in their business dealings, in their international relations than Europe. Only second to America, and I would argue we're doing it on behalf of the Europeans there as well. You got Great Britain. I mean, they gave their entire national security system over to the CCP for pennies on the dollar, I would assume. Right? They just said, here, CCTV here. You take our security. You run the deal. And the British want to say, well, they can't get a look at the inner code or what? Give me a break. The CCP, they got their balls out, dragging their balls all across Great Britain right now. And not just Great Britain. Right? So the globalists are hedging their bet. They have a two-sided coin. They have a two-pronged plan for the future. And right here is the most difficult thing, I think, for Americans to wrap their head around. In one scenario, the Americans win. And America continues on with business as usual. But if America falls, if America collapses and China rises, what does America become? America becomes the tributary state. America becomes Persia. America becomes the Ottoman Empire. And China becomes the new protectorate of the whole world, the adjudicator, the one to settle the disputes. And the great mistake that the British are making, the great mistake that the Europeans are making is they think they can manipulate the Chinese. I mean, that's where the real arrogance of this globalist agenda and subsequently this neocon agenda really lies. They think they can outsmart the Chinese. They think they can play the Chinese. They think that when it's all said and done, that the Chinese are going to allow the European aristocrats to have their their posh, luxurious positions as bannermen of the CCP in the Chinese empire. No, the first thing the Chinese are going to do when they get in an advantaged position, they're going to come door to door and they're going to shoot every one of these European aristocrats in the back of the head. And anybody who followed them, they're going to throw them in jail. They're going to formally re-educate them. But they probably won't even waste time with that. I mean, they only really spend time re-educating people who are Chinese, right? No, nobody's more ethno-national than the CCP. Not many people more ethno-national than the Israelis. Russia, ethno-national. The Iranians, ethno-national. There's a lot of ethno-nationalism out there on the world stage for a society and culture that says we believe in this diversity, equity, and inclusion. I mean, we sure want to be very global in a global community that's super ethno-national. The Europeans, the party of Davos, they're hedging their bets. They're sitting back, letting the Americans hurl ourselves into everybody else's foreign problems, everybody's foreign policy, and we have to play protected around the world. And I ask you at home, why? I ask Mark Levin, why? I ask neocon extraordinaires like David Frum or the Bushes, why? Why do we need to be all over the world? And what scenario, what end game is us being spread thin, this thin, not what end game does us being spread this thin not result in exactly what happened to the Roman Empire? Somebody tell me. They all talk about a plan. They all talk about being astute and learned and educated, and they have all these degrees and expertise, and they have all of these, these friends or these little communities of people and think tanks and all that. Somebody come forward and tell us how we do not turn into the Roman Empire. Well, fellow Americans, they've already done that. They've already come in and told you how. They've already come in and told you how this doesn't turn into the Roman Empire. The only difference is in the fall of the Roman Empire, the elites of the Roman Empire didn't get rich as it went down. Show me an empire in decline where its elites got rich as it collapsed. Show me an empire. Mark Levin, you conservative motherfucker, the great one, step right on up to the podium and tell me when there was an empire in human history where the elites got rich, substantially rich, as the ship went down. The Mark Levins of the world got rich. The George Bushes of the world got rich. The David Frums, they're wealthy. Everybody's getting a check. Everybody's getting a piece. Whether they're consultants or whatever the case may be. On the Democrat side too, everybody's getting a piece of that $5 trillion chunk of taxpayer money. And not only the money, the debt, the phony money, the money that we just print, they're all getting their piece of it. You at home, you're getting screwed. You're getting fucked. You can't go to the grocery store and get eggs for a reasonable price. You can't go and get produce for a reasonable price. And not only that, you can't go get produce that on top of that, they don't want to inject with hormones, to say the least, but now potentially vaccine materials, synthetic materials that you don't get a choice in. Well, of course you don't. You haven't had a choice in this entire economic Ponzi scheme. You haven't had a choice in this scheme the whole time. The whole agenda is to gorilla pimp you. It's to gorilla deal you. We're going to raise the price, and you got to buy. And not only do you have to buy, you're going to beg us to buy. You're going to beg us for universal basic income. You're going to beg us for vaccines. You're going to beg us for martial law because the Muslims are coming. Not that we have 500 million guns in this country. Not that we have 500 guns in a country that's one of the most fertile and natural resource rich. And to go back to this lie from McKinder to show you that we're serving the Europeans, let's just think in first principles about this entire Eurasian world island theory. Let's say that Germany, which was the great threat at the time when he wrote the paper, he was worried that the Germans, that the Germans would be the ones to take Europe, or a German-Russian alliance, or a Russia-Sino alliance, which we kind of have now, right? And you could make the claim, one could make the claim that the crown originally helped motivate Adolf Hitler and the Nazis to go into Russia, just for the sole purpose to ensure that John Mackinder's land theory from 30 years previous didn't come to fruition between the Germans and the Russians. And today, almost 100 years later, the rift between the Russians and Germans is still so strong, it's now being played out there in the Ukraine theater. Hello? Still servicing the same interest. Don't let the Germans and the Russians come together. We let the Germans and the Russians come together, Great Britain is fucked. A Sino-Russia alliance. Well, Japan's under the rule and the scope of America. But hey, there's a new player there in the East. There's a new big dog in the East. Been working on it for about 40 years now, called China. And if we can get China and Russia on the same page, ooh boy, we got a reversal of the Mackinder World Island theory. Iran, Russia, China. Well, let's just say they come together and monopolize all the natural resources on the Eurasian landmass. What the fuck does that have to do with us? In Mackinder's original theory, it's only 50% of the resources. Why? Because America and the Western Hemisphere has the other 50% of the resources. I mean, this is basic fucking math. They can tell you need to go to Yale or West Point or Harvard or SAIS or one of these international schools of political poetry if they want to. You can believe it if you want to. You can believe the Mark Levin's knowledge of the United States Constitution is so profound that we should call him the great one. Well, let's just get back to the basics. Let's not talk in profundities. Let's just talk about the basics. If 50% of the world's resources are there on the Eurasian landmass, and Europe had its early intellectual leaders before the start of the great conflicts of World War I and World War II, if those leaders believe that these resources on the Eurasian landmass must be protected, defended, even if to use divide and conquer strategies, promulgation of war, if need be. If 50% of the resources belong to them, if 50% of the resources are at stake there, why is it our national interest? We have everything we need right here. We have everything we need right here. Well, Kissinger changed that. The neocons actually were the original cog in the machine. They changed that. They brought us to a society. They brought us to an economy. They brought us to a Western world, a Western industrial world where our essentials are no longer manufactured here in this country or here in this hemisphere for that matter. They brought us into this brainwashed, fictitious sort of fugazi of globalization and the entanglement of markets and supply chains. This is what America First really means, Mark Levin. This is the heart of what America First is really trying to talk about. Not the LGBTQ, not radical feminism and the Time's Up movement, not BLM, and not even, for that matter, Marxism there on the European continent or on the Eurasian landmass. Let all these Finocchio, European, Chinese, Arabian, Marxist, communists, whatever ism jerk off they want to play with one another, let them do it. Let's bring our boys home and hold down the fort and prepare. And yeah, we're going to go to a multipolar world one way or another. Either it's going to be the managed decline of our elites or it's going to be by our own will as the American people. We the people. We better get used to it now. Bring our boys home, hold down the fort, get ready for the war if it comes. Maybe it doesn't. Let them have their day in the sun over there in the Eurasian landmass. Let the Europeans rise up and fight their own revolutionary war against the new hegemony. But they don't want to do that because, for the most part, when the Europeans get put on the griddle, a lot of them are going to sell out. I'll tell you who won't. Poland won't sell out. Italy has a profound sense of national honor. They're not selling out. The French can never trust them. They can never trust them, respectfully. Okay. Great Britain selling out as quick as you possibly could, quicker than you could imagine. The rest of them, oh, they'll fall like dominoes. I don't even know what to say about the rest of the European Union. Who cares? I don't need to make predictions about them. Let them fight their own revolutionary war for the Stop using us. Stop using us to play police and cop for the Europeans. And you have to ask ourselves, why are we doing this? I mean, in the earliest days of the Atlantic Charter and this idea of English Commonwealth, the Five Eyes, for example, Great Britain, the UK, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, America, all a part of the Commonwealth. Yeah. Canada still pays tribute to the crown. I mean, come on, Trudeau, give me a break. Finocchio of the year. And America, all based on language, English language, the English language being the commonality that ties us together. I think we got to start looking towards the future, guys. For all my boomers out there, dear boomers, it's me, the Hatchet Man, okay? I think we got to start looking towards the future. Let's not let race and language be the silver lining of our alliance and our foreign policy. I think we're a little bit more mature and a little more wise than that, right? Are we going to keep letting the British march us around the park like their lapdog? Are we going to keep protecting the Europeans at any and all expense? Are you going to keep letting the department of your own elites, your own political elites, steal money from you, from your tax, from your hard-earned work, an infinite tax, an infinite amount of taxes from you, putting you in debt, putting your grandchildren in debt to protect Europe? On what basis? On what basis? Who even says their beliefs are still the same as ours? And they can talk about democracy. All I see is a bunch of European, technocratic, posh, omnisexual elites who have this comfortable, cozy, comfy position because they know that NATO's going to be right there to protect them. This has been another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio and powered by our favorite sponsor, Tireget.com. That's Tireget.com. You have to buy tires from somebody, you might as well buy them from us. Help fund the movement, help support the movement. We believe in the freedom of movement, and that is exactly what the establishment wants to take from you now. I'm your host, Royce White, here in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota. Special thank you to Band.video for hosting our material, our content, my podcast on their channel. Special thank you to Fearless and the Fearless Army. Special thank you to Jason Whitlock for all of the support that he's provided to the podcast and to the conversation and the things that I'm trying to share with the American people. Thank you to Vivek Ramaswamy recently for having me on his podcast. That podcast is doing well, and I had the honor to go before the great Alex Jones and the Vivek Ramaswamy podcast seasonal lineup. And last but not least, the War Room Posse. Oh, I love you. Oh, you are my kind of people. I don't care what they say about you. There isn't a single set of circumstances that will ever get me to renounce my affiliation, my fealty, my love, respect, and admiration for the War Room Posse. You people are pipe hitters. You are the ones that are going to save this republic. And what I caution you towards today is not to demean you. It's not to insult you. It's to try and provide another perspective from outside of the traditional nomenclature of middle-aged boomer American conservatives to see exactly who the enemy is, exactly what we must focus on. We can talk about BLM. We can talk about the LGBTQ. We can talk about the Time's Up and radical feminism. We can even talk about Marxism. Once we restore order to our own side of this movement, this fight. And that fight is the Republican Party. That fight is the conservative movement. If we let neocons and rhinos lead us because they're polite, because they're polished, because they're puppets of the system, we can't save the republic. We can't do it. We just won't be able to do it. And we can do it. We can do it. 300,000 Republican Party seats, only 100,000 full. This is the precinct strategy that Steve Bannon and the great Dan Schultz and many others are trying to emphasize, trying to help people understand the importance of. All we have to do is vote these rhinos and neocons out. And then, we're going to have to pray, and we're going to have to huddle up with our best minds, our most integrity based people to help sort out who we hire in the administration to do our best to ensure that neocons and rhinos do not have the chance to misguide or mislead the great Donald Trump when he takes office in 2024. Isn't it glorious? Can't you feel it? Can't you feel it when a Donald Trump says, Tom Emmer, not my friend? When a Donald Trump says, hey, Kevin McCarthy, I gave him my support, but hey, he made some promises he couldn't keep. Not my guy. He's got to go, right? When Donald Trump looks at the entire American audience, when Donald Trump goes on stage and says in the belly of the beast there with the CNN town hall and says, we just want the war to stop. You're looking at, despite any flaws, despite any disagreements, despite any cultural wedge issues that you're not in alignment with Donald Trump on, the entire Ron DeSanctimonious crowd, who's the controlled opposition of neocons. Ron DeSantis is a neocon. These people who are behind him are neocons. Nikki Haley's a fucking neocon. Karl Rove, neocon. Neocon. This is the neocon. And they're going to tell you that Donald Trump's morality disqualifies him from the office, from the seriousness of the position or the time in this country's history. They're going to tell you everything that pulls on your emotion. But they're always going to fail to mention the $5 trillion whack up that goes to 2,000 people that perpetuates the scam, the Ponzi scheme of the administrative state, the military-industrial complex, your need for security. They're going to make you beg for tyranny. They're working for the globalist agenda. They're working for their own agenda, and it has nothing to do with you. And it has nothing to do with your ideas, your values, your belief about culture or about the future of this great nation. The fight continues. Don't die a jerk off. And as always, Godspeed.